I won't introduce myself too much here. I'm just here to show you a piece of work we did with a friend of mine, Dionysis, here. And it's been a while since then, and now we're implementing this in JavaScript. So this is an idea I would just like to show you because it shows how you can use money for something that is not money, or something that is very different from what we perceive as money. And Bitcoin, of course, and other cryptocurrencies enable us to do these things. So the main problem that we would like to solve is to create a decentralized marketplace. What is a decentralized marketplace? Like OpenBazaar, it's let's say a platform, an application, something that lives on the internet that gives you access to many vendors. So it's like a marketplace where you go and there are many vendors, many buyers, but no owner of the platform, like the street. This is why it's decentralized. It reminds us of eBay, but without having the company mediating stuff. So in the decentralized setting, you cannot call somebody as culpable of a fault, and it's impossible to drag them to the court, especially if they're at the other end of the planet. And stars and ratings do not work. Because you can have, somebody can create Sybil accounts, many fake accounts, and give 5 stars to their own things. And this will create the illusion that they themselves are very good vendors, and they can thus hoax and trick other people. And so what we would like to do is to have a system where no fees are included, and we have a good quality decentralized reputation that is Sybil resilient and makes sense for people to use, just like stars make sense. So the vanilla example of what we want to do is here. Dave and Carol are 2 parties that want to exchange, but they don't have any. They do not know each other. In the physical world, they just have met each other in the digital world, on the internet. And on the internet, there's no such thing as at the same time. So we would like to find a way to ensure that even though one of the 2 will send first, the other party will likely not be defrauded. If they have a common friend that they both trust, they could use them as an escrow. But this is just shifting the problem 1 step behind, because escrows are not always available. And actually, we've seen cases of fraud involving escrows. So our idea goes to a different direction. Let's say that you have 60 millibitcoins in total, and you have 2 very good friends, Charlie and Bob, and you decide to share this money with Charlie and Bob. So what does this mean? This means that Charlie has, you and Charlie have access to your 36 millibitcoin, and Charlie could spend this money instead of you. The same goes for Bob. He can spend your 24 millibitcoin. And this is, you actually as a user click and decide. And you actually risk 60 millibitcoin, but you're part of the Trust is Risk network. And so why would you ever do that? Because you go to this web page. This is an example from OpenBazaar, from a store, an online store in the OpenBazaar platform. And you can see right here that we have replaced with Photoshop the 5 stars that were there with can spend up to 20 millibitcoin. And the price of the product is 6 millibitcoin. So the platform would suggest that this vendor is trustworthy up to 20 millibitcoin according to your particular graph of trust, as we're going to see now how it works. And since the product is 6 millibitcoins, then the platform says that probably this vendor is trustworthy and will not try to cheat you. Let's see why this happens this way. And actually what the wallet does if you decide to pay is that it will reduce your trust from your friends. It will take the money that you have entrusted to your friends. they will not lose any money because it was not their money in the first place. But they will. But now Charlie is able to spend only 32 of the millibitcoins you entrusted them in the beginning, and it will shift this trust to the vendor. The vendor can actually now take the 6 millibitcoin and do whatever they want with it. And your wallet will decide exactly how this redistribution is going to happen. So the core of this idea is that with Bitcoin you can actually, instead of just having a simple transaction where Alice pays Bob and there's a simple transfer of value from the pocket of Alice to the pocket of Bob, and Bob has and Alice has no access to the money anymore, we have these things called multi-sigs. Specifically, we use one of two multi-sigs, and the idea is that Alice can actually pay into a transaction which can be spent by either herself or somebody else, which she has specified. And so, in this particular example, every single node is one person, one player. Let's call them players, and each edge is one of two multi-sigs. So in this case, what we see is that, for example, B has entrusted 1 millibitcoin to A, and C has entrusted 10 millibitcoin to E. That means that on the ledger, on the Bitcoin ledger, we can all of us can see one unspent transaction which C has funded, and says that either C or E can take 10 millibitcoin and spend them. The same goes for each of these edges. Each of these edges represents one unspent output that is in one of two multi-sig, funded by the person who is at the beginning of the edge. For example, for the BA trust, B funded the multi-sig with 1 millibitcoin. And this is a statement of trust, because if A decides to spend this money, then this output will not exist anymore on the blockchain, and we will not be able to assume that B trusts A. As long as the output is there, we can assume that B trusts A. And this is really important, that trust is exactly the risk that B is taking in the face of A. So what can happen is that, that's very simple, but it's like the plumbing of the system, is that each individual player can actually change the state of the system by adding trust, reducing trust, and stealing trust, the trust that other people have shown them. For example, here, let's say that D plays, D has booted up their computer and want to change the state of the system, and they can add some trust to C. Before it used to be 0, so now they can add 4 millibitcoins to C, and they can decide to add the -1 to B, and so this will become from 2 will turn into a 1, and now they will do a bad thing. They will steal the trust that A has shown them, and they will steal just 1 millibitcoin, and so the 5 will become the 6 will become a 5, and this is the new state of the graph. These kinds of changes can happen all the time, and each change is one transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain. Just a note here, this whole idea can move over to any other platform. We're just implementing it for Bitcoin right now. But any other cryptocurrency that is as strong as Bitcoin can do the whole thing that we're discussing here. So, what we would like to see from a system like that is two very important properties. The first is risk invariance, which in very coarse terms, I will explain a bit more later, but in very coarse terms, we would like to bound the risk towards any vendor, so the money that any vendor can steal from us should not exceed the money that we entrust our friends. And this is very coarse. We achieve even better than this. And of course, we find it really important to have a Sybil resilience. So, as we discussed before, if you make many accounts, you gain no benefit by that. You can create as many accounts as you like, but it will not give you in any way advantage over other people who don't. So, here is probably the most dense slide of this talk. And why would I ever do this whole thing? As we saw earlier, there's on the vendor webpage, you would have an indication of how much you trust this vendor. But this vendor is not necessarily a friend. Is not someone towards whom you have already entrusted some money actively. They may be a complete stranger that you found online, and you wouldn't actively trust them any money. However, this vendor is probably trusted by someone else who is trusted by someone else who is trusted, and so on, by you. So there is probably a chain, or maybe even more chains, from yourself to the vendor. And these are chains that you can leverage. These are chains of trust that you can find as evidence that this particular vendor is trustworthy. And so how we go about calculating this trust in exact terms is by using the max flow algorithm on the graph you saw before, on this graph, for example. You can calculate the max flow from A to B. For the people who haven't heard of max flow is a simple, a very important but simple algorithm which says that imagine that each of these edges is a pipe that carries water. Some pipes are bigger, like the ones that have 10 milli Bitcoin, and some pipes cannot carry so much water, like the 1 milli Bitcoin pipe. The max flow says how much water can flow from the first node to the second, from A to B in this case, for example. And so the bigger the pipes, the more water can flow. The bigger the trust, the direct trusts, the small trusts that users actively created, the more trust, indirect trust should A assume that should A show to B. So here we are. So, and this and we have proven that this max flow algorithm actually corresponds to a very intuitive rule of how of how trust should work. I don't want to go into too much of a detail, but the main idea is that if the vendor were evil and the vendor wanted to steal the money, all the money that he could, and run away, and everybody else tried to just balance their portfolio by stealing from other people who have entrusted them as much as is necessary to refund their losses, then the maximum damage that this vendor could cause to us is exactly equal to the max flow that runs from us to the vendor. And so we've proven this thing, and this means that we can use this amazing algorithm for something more intuitive than what the algorithm says in and of itself. So this is indirect trust. This is the number that you saw on this, the 20 milli Bitcoin that could be spent on the Carolina Reaper. And let's see another example of that. Let's say that here you want to buy something actually expensive, a digital camera. Okay, this is too expensive now, but it used to be an actual real price back in the day when I made the slides. And so in this case, let's say that the client trusts the vendor to Bitcoin. It so happens to be that he ran the software, and this particular vendor is trustworthy up to 2 Bitcoin. And the camera is worth 1 Bitcoin, so he wants to actually buy it because the vendor should be trustworthy. If the vendor wanted to run and take the money, he could actually, without even the person trusting the vendor directly, the maximum damage that the vendor could cause to the client without even beginning the transaction would be 2 Bitcoin. And now the camera costs only 1 Bitcoin. So the fact that the vendor is not running away already means that he's trustworthy enough for the client to buy the camera and trust that the camera will be delivered to them. If the camera is not delivered to them, the vendor would have already stolen this money and would have already run away. He can't do it now. So the risk invariance theorem, in more detail, what it says is that there is always a way for the wallet to reorganize the money and redistribute the money that was entrusted to the friends in a way that that the new graph, after the reorganization, has two good properties. First, the client has paid the vendor the exact sum that they want to pay, and second, in the whole chain of changes that happened on the blockchain, there was not a single moment when the indirect trust before the trade changed from actually increased more than the initial indirect trust. So this means that if you see a product and you say that, okay, this vendor is trustworthy enough and I can buy from them, then clicking buy does not expose you to more risk than before. And this is a very important property because it ensures you that doing the trade does not make you more vulnerable than before. And the other property that we talked about is the Sybil attack. And our system prevents any kind of Sybil attacks. This image explains in a very concise form why. Let's say that Alice is a good, honest person, and then there is a set of kind of greedy nodes that want to get more money. And we split them into two categories: the corrupted ones, which are the real bad guys, and the Sybil ones that do not exist in the real world but are just fake identities, fake accounts they created, the corrupted ones created. And as you see in this box, no matter what the corrupted and the Sybil people do, there is no case that Alice will pour in more trust to the box, apart from the case that corrupted people do actually good things and make Alice trust them more. But the fact that they created the Sybil box did not help them in any way increase their trust, increase the trust that Alice shows to them. And this holds for any Alice, for any player that is outside this box. So creating more accounts is not a good strategy for gaining money. And this is a very small proof of that. This is not the case for star-based systems. This is not the case for some star-based systems, because in star-based systems, making more Sybil accounts will increase actually your score, will make you seem like better. And in decentralized systems, you cannot actually do tricks that eBay does, like filtering IPs and setting rate limits and changing things like that. You have to write the protocol and be sure that it works from the beginning, and not have a central authority to fix and maintain the status quo, which defeats the purpose. So that's the main idea, and I would like to hear questions from you. I've kept it brief, and I hope that I've made my point clear. But if there's anything that I haven't explained well enough, please feel free to ask as many questions as you like.
Thank you for this presentation. It's super cool. My initial question would be, since you proved that like making purchases does not expose your additional risk, where does the initial risk come from? You have to put out some initial kind of exposure, and your suggestion is that you only sort of do that with friends or people you otherwise trust, but you do essentially have to put your money at risk at some point, or essentially lose ownership of your money before you can use a system like this. So how do you propose like sort of a mechanism? Is there something you can think of to deal with this, or why this would not be an issue?
So you're talking about bootstrapping the system, right?
Yeah, well, just in general, like it's just in general, because your system assumes that you have some kind of exposure to other people in a network in any kind of way. But essentially that means that that exposure means that you are at risk to have that money stolen at any time. So you have to be comfortable at it, like in the beginning, to create that exposure to any kind of network. And like from your slides, I assume that the idea is that initially you expose a risk to people you trust. But this is a bootstrapping problem. Like for a lot of people, I think it's unacceptable to even have any kind of risk. Like I don't. I mean, maybe I trust some of my friends with my money, but like if I want to make regular purchases with any amount of money, I essentially first have to risk that money to some kind of network and maybe my friends before I can start spending. Like, how do you mitigate this?
So yeah, that's actually a mentality problem that you may or may not have, and is very common in the general population. But every time you transact, every time you give money to somebody, every time you receive money from somebody, actually let's focus in the case where you receive money. Every time you receive coins, you trust a huge system that the next person will also accept your money. And this is a kind of, and in my opinion, this is somewhat philosophical. If you want to have any kind of money, you have to have some kind of trust between people. And I think this kind of trust is more, is safer for the first part, because you trust only your friends and you don't trust a vague entity that's called central bank or whatever. And secondly, it's certainly more decentralized and more self-organizing, and people that are not people are directly incentivized to cooperate and to act well, because if not, they will directly lose their trust. Whereas a system like the central bank does not have the same incentives as you, and so they may have all the incentives of the world to try to cheat you. Yeah, it really sounds very counterintuitive. Yes. So
yeah. It's basically, how do we get the that initial trust to kickstart the system? Yeah. Is that correct? And not feeling comfortable with that versus or just spending a Bitcoin.
Yeah, so the difference is like, it's different from trusting a money like Bitcoin, because you can trust Bitcoin, but it's different from trusting people. Whereas they have, with Bitcoin, there is no incentive for the Bitcoin network to steal my money, so I can trust it. But if I have to trust people to hold my money and not steal it, they have no incentive to not steal my money, unless they like value my friendship very highly, which I hope they do. But it's a different kind of trust. And you're essentially asking people to give their money to their friends before they can spend it, which I find somewhat unrealistic. Like, I don't think you actually have your friends hold on to your cash or your wallet for any extended period of time just so you can spend it.
So yeah, I think that this comes with a change of mentality and realizing that there are many systems that we are currently trusting, like your bank. And your bank, why doesn't our bank steal from us? Because there's some reputation behind. The same thing would go if you're, for example, you are also trusted by other people, and your friend or the person you have trusted your money would like to keep access to those people. Because think of that. If I trust you and you trust somebody else, and that somebody else steals from you, then I will no longer see them when I see that I trust them when I log into their site, and they will lose some exposure. So they have, if you are not an edge node and you have some incoming trust as well, not only outgoing, they do have incentives to keep you as a friend, to not steal from you.
Yes, but that assumes identity. like that assumes identity. But what if, like, if I'm dealing with someone online that I'm trading with, I don't know what identity they have. It can just be any Bitcoin wallet, and maybe they don't have anything to lose. So what if people start stealing? Like I can assure that at some point someone will steal money, and that means that someone in the network will lose money. Where do you externalize those kind of losses? I mean, I assume that for most trustworthy people that a network like this works, but there will be people that are corrupt and they will steal money, so the network will lose money somehow. And even if I trust everyone that I trust, I have to assume that eventually some of my money will be stolen, because someone in the network will steal some money, because it's just a wallet and they don't care about any kind of relationships that they lose.
So what you're saying here is that so my answer to that is that yes, this can happen, but if the system is designed in a way that it's very easy to punish for the people who were who still have some trust towards a person or an entity that stole, they have all the incentives of the world to stop trusting them right away. So you have a choice as a node to either steal everything that's coming in, that all the trust that people have shown you, and die and run away and do not exist anymore on the network, which is a choice. But maybe, hopefully, this network could become important enough for you not to be able to run away from it, and this is the idea of how enterprises. How do you trust an enterprise? You trust it because they've invested time, and it seems unreasonable that they will steal from you just a tiny bit of money, exposing all their hard work and compromising all their hard work. And this thing will, in this network, you build identity, and this is the way. This is one possible way to build decentralized identity, and have the incentives not to destroy it later on.
Yeah. I think in the interest of time, because this sounds like a good discussion over a break, and we have a few more presenters. So I think we'll ask to move that discussion to the next break. Thank you very much, Orfeas.